During the break, a few of us were having a discussion about the comment that I made, speaking of the church. And I think someone had said, our church, and I asked, is it our church or their church? So we had a bit of a discussion about that. I don't know if it causes people some consternation to even think about those ideas. If you go to the prophecy school that was just completed last week, I think it was, in Arkansas, some of those ideas and thoughts are discussed there, fleshed out in a little bit more detail about the relationship at the, I was going to say at the end of the world, but in any reform line of what the Lord is trying to do and how he goes about reforming his church. Coming back to our study, we're in Daniel 11 verse 40, and we've seen that there's this chiastic structure that's here at the semicolon. At the time of the end, two things are happening. Someone asked the question that there's a semicolon further on down the verse, which I put into this box. So in the previous presentation, all of that wasn't there. But you could go into the rest of the verse and begin to understand what's going on at the back end of that verse, which we haven't taken the time to do. So that's what all that is showing. So let's go to Revelation chapter 17. We've identified that at the time of the end, in 1798, atheistic France, a new power that comes from the bottomless pit, a new agency of Satan is going to begin to do a work to persecute God's people. And in the mix of all of that, not only is it going to persecute God's people, which are the two witnesses, that's how they're portrayed in Revelation 11, also it's going to deliver a deadly wound to the papal church. And how does it deliver that deadly wound? It doesn't kill the church. Rather, it severs the relationship between the church and the state. Yeah? And it does that by crushing, essentially, the countries or the nations in Europe. So we'll hold that thought, because I want to make some further explanation of that. That's what's happening here in 1798. Then what we're going to see, at the same time, the King of the North here is going to do a revenge attack against the King of the South. So at the time of the end, King of the South attacks the King of the North, and then the King of the North is going to attack the King of the South. We can see that? Yeah? So I want us to see that the relationship between verse 40 and the rest of Daniel 11 is all about revenge or vengeance. Because what happened way back in the previous verses, we didn't actually read the verse, but if we were thinking about the Battle of Actium, this struggle between the King of the North and the King of the South, which was Greece. That was Greece, and then Rome, pagan Rome, is going to come and it's going to take down Syria, Israel, and Egypt. So it destroys that. King of the South comes out of the scene of Earth history. Then when it comes back here in verse 40, why is it coming back? What does it want to do? It wants to get revenge for everything that happened in 31 BC. So I want us to see that we can run a thread through Daniel 11 that helps us to tie together these varying nations or empires of Bible prophecy. Because if we don't do that, we have disconnected thoughts, and it becomes problematic to tie in end time history to Old Testament history. But that's what we're required to do, I think. So, the king of the south, Egypt, Greece, is punished, destroyed, taken out of the scenes in 31 BC. The reason why it's important to keep that continuity or that thread running through is in 31 BC, the Battle of Actium, Cleopatra, the Princess of Egypt. Is that Egypt? No, it's not Egypt. If you think that's Egypt, none of it makes any sense. But if you realize that it's Greece, then it begins to make sense. Now, yesterday, we didn't revise this today. We should have done. It's just there's not enough time to do it in a weekend series. You remember that we went to two Bible passages. We went to Revelation 13, verse 11. And what's Revelation 13:11 speaking of? Speaking about a baby sheep that's just born, or a sheep that's born, which is a lamb. It's got two horns. That's this imagery here. And then we went to another Bible passage, which was Daniel chapter 8. I think it's verse 3. Unless someone can find it quicker than I can, just to make sure that I don't give you a wrong verse. Let me just make sure I've got the verses right. Yeah, it's verse 3 and verse 20. So let me just finish my point. So we went to Revelation 13:11, and Revelation 13:11 is about a sheep that's just born, and it's going to rise up out of the earth. It's got two horns. And then Daniel chapter 8, verses 3 and verse 20 talk about another sheep that's in its maturity. And this mature sheep, it's going to come to its demise in the next few verses, verses 4 and 5. But what I want us to see that in Revelation 13:11, the sheep is the USA. You have that? But in Daniel chapter 8, the sheep is the Medes and the Persians. What connects them together is not only that they're sheep, but they both have two horns. And what that begins to allow us to do is to go back into Old Testament history, this history here, and then begin to make end-time applications of all of this. Hence the importance of seeing that the king of the south, Cleopatra, Daniel chapter 8, verse 9, is not Egypt, it's Greece. And my sister's question was?
Yes, you mentioned that Cleopatra is actually Grecian.
Yes.
But she's actually was the ruler of Egypt.
Yes.
At the time, and because of her alliance with Rome, through those, well, with her being with Mark Antony and another one I can't remember. Does that create some like alliance with takeover from Rome? I mean, over Egypt, but Grecian. So I'm trying to think of it in a little.
So Egypt had got taken over by many nations for hundreds of years. So they're at war with the Babylonians, they're at war with the Medo-Persians, and they eventually are at war with the Grecians, Alexander the Great. So once Alexander the Great gets onto the scene, and he's taken over most of the world, right from, I think, the western tip of Africa, maybe even going down south, but right over to India. He's taken over most of the known world. One of the countries he's going to take over is Egypt. So it becomes like a vassal state or a district or a part of his empire. Once he dies, his empire is just going to get chopped up into pieces, and one of his generals is going to take that part of the empire and begin to control it. So it had been subjugated to the Grecian Empire in the time period of Alexander the Great. Once he dies, and then, as I say, the four generals take over, then goes from 4 to 2. The Ptolemies, or the Ptolemaic dynasty, then has control of that part of the world for hundreds of years. So Cleopatra is just the very last part of that family tree that runs all the way from one of Alexander the Great's generals, Ptolemy. Goes all the way down through to the end of that. Now, in the literal history, she's going to begin to have some kind of relationship with Rome. And the purpose for that is that they want to go into an alliance because there's an internal struggle that's happening within Rome between the leaders. So, without going into all the names, there's, say, two leaders, rival leaders in Rome, and one of them's going to try and get help from Egypt. So they're going to go into a pact, and so that they can take over and control Rome. So that's what the Battle of Actium is about. As Rome, at a prophetic level, not only just sort of does away with Mark Antony, but it finally takes over the vestiges or the last remnants of Greece. But if you read a story about it or watched a movie, it wouldn't give you that perspective. It's all about love and intrigue and the struggle between the leaders in Rome, between Mark Antony and his rival in Rome. It seems all a bit sordid. So I want us to step back from all of that sordid literal history, using the same literal history, but understand it from a prophetic narrative. So hopefully that answers your question. So here Egypt got killed. It's been in subjugation to the King of the North all of these many, many years. Then suddenly it pops out of nowhere, and it's now atheistic France, right here, 1798. Then we've got the time of the end, and we're going to try and make this 1989. So if we're going to do this conventional, I was going to say the conventional way, the way we normally would do this, which is correct, it's correct. We know that this is the papacy, because the papacy was here, same thing. And now we're going to say the King of the South isn't France, because France has become good now at the end of the world. It's, we'll call it Russia, and I'll put in brackets the Soviet Union. So we're going to have to come up with some logic to make France transition or morph into Russia. So we've got that challenge to do. And we say, well, the papacy is the papacy. So we all know, especially when we factor in this portion here, chariots, horsemen and ships, chariots, the horsemen and ship, is what the King of the North, this power here, is going to use to overflow and pass over or bring to its demise the King of the South. It's going to use these elements. It's going to do it as a whirlwind, but it's going to use chariot, ships and horsemen. So we could go into that study and we could see chariots and horsemen and ships as symbols of military and economic strength. So the papacy is going to use economic and military strength to do something against the King of the South. So as soon as you start thinking about this economic and military power, you have to ask yourself the question, where does the papal church get military and economic power from? If we go to Revelation 17, which we're in, it says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, verse 2. So I would suggest that military and economic strength is centered in a government or a state or a country. Let me not say country, let me say nation. And I'll put an S, so I'm not trying to specifically say it's an individual thing. So for the King of the North, this church, to do anything, it needs military and economic strength, and military and economic strength is centered or housed in a government, in a country, not in the church. So when you begin to see this dynamic, that the King of the North, the papacy, is going to use a state to do its work for it, to attack the King of the South, because that's what the verse teaches, then you can begin to see, hold on, this sounds like what we had in the 1260. Because we read that, he went into the wilderness and we saw all of these things happening. In the wilderness, you get the papal church that gets into a relationship with the kings of Europe and manages that. She sits on the seas. The seas are not just peoples in some generic sense. It's specific nations, specific countries, and it's Europe in the 1260. So when she receives her deadly wound here, what was the deadly wound? When Jesus stamped on her. He didn't kill her. He didn't kill the countries. What he killed or severed was their relationship. So what does she want to do? She wants to restore the relationship. So that's what's being portrayed in this verse. The restoration of the relationship, where the papacy is going to use a nation state to begin to do her bidding to come and attack the King of the South. Hopefully we can see that. She receives a deadly wound here. What was her deadly wound? Nothing happened to her per se. Nothing happened to the countries per se. They weren't obliterated off the face of the earth. The deadly wound was a separation of what? Church and state. Separation of church and state. At whose behest did that occur? France's. When Napoleon said, we're going to go atheistic, forget all of this God stuff, he severed his relationship with the church. And not only did he do that, he said, we're not the only people who are going to do that. Everyone's going to do the same thing. If you don't agree, we'll put you to the sword. Because he also not only wanted to do that, serve God, if you like, he was a megalomaniac and he wanted to serve himself because he wanted the full control of Europe. So God uses tyrants and crazy people to do his will. He also uses good people to do his will as well. I mean, there are many good kings, Cyrus, Nebuchadnezzar, really faithful, decent men. Okay, so we've understood the dynamic that's gone on here. Now, the papacy wants to take revenge. She can't do it, she's a church, so she needs to get the help of a state, military and economic power. And how does she do it? She sits at the corner of the street, flaunts herself, and says, I'm back in business. But before she did this, she laid the groundwork, not with her, because she's getting a bit old. She took one of her daughters to do that work. And what was the name of the daughter? Protestant America, right here. The Protestants began to fall, go back into Babylon in the year 1844, April the 19th. So the work has already begun. As time progressed, now she's going to begin to take control of that. And it gets to a stage where unless you're really careful, you can't tell the difference. Is it the mother or the daughter that's doing the activities? Who's really in control? So it was a rhetorical question, because it's not that easy to see. Sometimes it's the daughter, sometimes it's the mother. If you go to the story of John the Baptist, who's in control? Is it the daughter or is it the mother? Yeah, the mother's pulling the strings, but the daughter's doing all the front work. So if you're Herod, how do you know who's running the show? It's really hard to see, because the daughter doesn't have to listen. Anyway, so the point is that there's a combination between the mother and the daughter, which I'm not making the distinction between. I'm just morphing them into one thing, a woman, whether it's a mother or a harlot. So this is what's being brought to view here. You can begin to see here in this history, wherever the date is going to be, there has to be this creation of a system or marriage or alliance between the papacy and the nation state that's going to begin to exert its authority and come against the king of the south, which we haven't proven, but we're sort of saying is Russia. If that's the case, then everyone in the whole world knows that the event was 1989, where a deadly wound or punishment was delivered to Russia, the Soviet bloc, in revenge or punishment for what they did back here in 1798. And that's our logic to show that 1989 is the time of the end, because it has all the same characteristics as 1798. But here, when we had this King of the North doing all of its activities, I've got the King of the North as the papacy, which is correct, but it's the papacy with whom? Papacy and Europe. Yes? Papacy in Europe. And Ellen White calls Europe the world. But what kind of a world? She calls it the old world. So sometimes my questions aren't very good. It's not that your answers aren't good, because you already know that it's the old world. So here's the old world. The papacy is back on the scene, back in business. What does she need to do? Get some kind of government, some state to help her. So here she is. So we've got the papacy, and she's not going to go to the old world. She's going to go to the new world. How do we know that? How can we prove that she wouldn't be going to the old world and not the new world? Revelation 17. Remember, this entity in Revelation 17 is not called a woman or anything now, it's called a beast. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of the beast and the woman and all of that, but here was this beast power here, and now we've got this beast coming back. So let's read verse 8. The beast that thou sawest was, and I'm saying the word was, is not only in the past, but it means was alive. When was the beast alive? I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to draw a line. And it's going to be divided into how many sections? 3. Past, present, and future. So it says the beast was alive. And I'm suggesting that in the context of the verses that we discussed in Revelation 17, the present is in the history from 1798 onwards. So if that's correct, and it is, when it says the beast was alive, that's here. Yes? So if this is 1798, when was the beast alive? 1260. It's this. Can we see the beast? We've got it right here. So the beast was alive. And in the present, it says, is not. And is not means dead. So here it is dead. Then it says, and I'm going to drop to the bottom of the verse before I read that one. And yet is, the last three words. Can we see that? The beast that was, the last part of verse 8 now, and is not, and yet is. The yet is means what? Alive. And I'm saying the life is at the end of the world. We did that from Isaiah 46 verse 10. Alive. So we can see the beast is alive, dead, and alive. If that's 1798, we've gone from Europe to where? To the US, to United States. Now the United States has caused Satan no end of problems. And it did that through the institutions that were created at the very same time where, I think I've rubbed it out, where there was this manifestation of satanic power. As the two witnesses are finishing their testimony, just before 1798, here, I'll draw it here, we had the new power, didn't we? Who was the new manifestation of satanic power? France. The very same time, there's another kingdom, another nation that is rising to power, and that is the United States. And in that history, the Constitution is developed, and it's going to develop a system that resists the onslaught of satanic agencies of the papacy for decades. So here's the United States in this history here. And what is the United States doing to the beast? Keeping it. It's dead. It's keeping it dead. Keeping it dead. If the United States wasn't there, what would have happened to the beast? It would have, in an instant, gone alive. So the beast is dead. And I'm saying what keeps the beast dead is the United States. But not the United States as, a few people or your government. What is it that keeps it dead specifically when we think about the United States? This here, these two horns and the separation between them. That's what's keeping this system dead. Once you get the separation of church and state and destroy it, do you have America? You don't have America anymore, do you? What do you have? Revelation 13:11. Revelation 13:11. What do you have? Because what is America? What is America? A sheep. It's a sheep. America's a sheep. When you break down the middle wall of partition, what does America turn into? A dragon. It's no longer a sheep, it's a dragon. It's a totally different animal. A dragon is nothing like a sheep. So, when this transition happens, I've given you all the clues now. Now let me ask you a question. The United States, is the United States, let me ask you one more, let me ask you a different question. In Revelation 17, there's a beast here, we haven't discussed this, that's got 7 heads, 10 horns. If we were to count through those 7 heads, are we all on the same page that we could list the kingdoms of Bible prophecy? Does everybody know that? Put your hands up if you don't know it. Everyone knows it? So you'd go Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece. Everybody can do that? Yeah? Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, pagan Rome. We'll go paper Rome. Number 6 is? Okay, so we're all okay with that. Okay, so this history here is what? Number. What number? This is number 5, and this is number 6. The future would be? Are we all okay there? Number 7. Yeah? Because there isn't a number 8, is there really?
No.
Yep. There's no number 8. It's only got 7 heads. So let me ask you this question. We teach in our message that the United States is going to institute a Sunday law. Is that even possible? No. Sorry? A dragon. So can we see? So all the clues, you got the clues. Yeah? At least some people did. Sheep cannot institute Sunday laws. Only dragons can. And what keeps America a sheep? As soon as you break that down, America is no longer America. The geography is still there. If you go onto an atlas, it still says the USA, but it's not the United States of America. It's not the glorious land as we understand what America is, or Protestant, whatever phrase you want to use. So let me ask you a different way. Can the 6th head create a Sunday law? So the people who said no before should be saying no now, because it's the same question, just asked a different way. The 6th head is who? Why is it dead? Because of the Constitution, the separation of church and state. That's what defines America. Once you lose that, America becomes a dragon. Once it becomes a dragon, then it can do anything. Can't it? Well, in certain terms it can do anything because it has to listen to its wife, because the wife runs the show. So it can't do anything it wants to. It just has to do anything that it's told to do. So the 6th head is not just any kind of America. What kind of America is it? It's a constitutional America, if that's the right, a Republican America. Let me put that, probably a better way of saying it. So when we transition from the 6th to the 7th, it allows a Sunday law to happen. But unless you have been keeping track of this movement's understanding of Bible prophecy, I don't mean in the last 2 weeks or 3 months or 6 months, over the last 2 or 3 years, you would never understand or be able to conceptualize that the United States, not as a piece of geography, not as those people who live in Washington, D.C. and make laws, the United States in Bible prophecy cannot make a Sunday law. The 6th head of Bible prophecy can't make Sunday laws. And that's different conceptually of how we've perhaps taught and understood it before. And why have we made that transition? We made that transition because we're required to, but what allowed us to make that transition? And I want to give you one word. It's a concept or an idea of progression. Without the idea or principle that things happen progressively, you can't develop that understanding. So I was really bad to my sister at the end of this presentation, last presentation, and I said, "Is it them or us?" If you don't remember, I said that. Then during the break, we had a discussion, and kind of running through the mill, and I wasn't very, kind to her, and I apologise for that. I seriously do. But I wanted us to see or begin to make the connection that if we don't understand things progressively, we don't even have a message. And it's that serious an issue, I think. You have to see things running progressively. I'll give you an example, which is the example that I made before. In the time of Christ, we have what we'll call the Jewish church. Call them the Jews. Ancient Israel. AI. Ancient Israel. And then after ancient Israel, you get the Christian dispensation. And the Christian dispensation is described in the whole of the New Testament because it's called the New Testament Church, book of Acts. It's also described in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3. And that church goes from the time of Christ all the way to the end of the world. And it's divided into 7 dispensations or histories that one church goes through. It's the same church. Begins in Ephesus. So the way Adventists normally teach Bible prophecy is to say, after the Jews, then you have the Christians. After ancient Israel, you have spiritual Israel. After the Jews, you then have Ephesus, which is the Christian dispensation. So it goes from the Jews to the Christians. This is running things sequentially. And there's a growing trend in our movement to run things sequentially, even though it's been in our movement, I'd say, for a number of years now, the necessity, not the nicety, the necessity of running things in a parallel fashion. Or, I'm using the phrase, progressively. If you don't do that, you come up with really weird and strange ideas. So, this model here is not correct. You don't have first the Jews, then the Christians, or first ancient Israel and then Ephesus. No. What you have, in the time of Christ, you have ancient Israel, and running concurrently with that, you have Ephesus. So this break happens here, and Ephesus needs to be taken underneath, and they run concurrently. And the reason we need to understand that is because the Jews, even in the time of Christ, don't come to their end suddenly, in a day. They begin to come to their end in a gradual process. And an easy place that you could see that would be when Jesus is born. We won't even go to when Jesus is born. We'll go to when John the Baptist is both conceived and born. Who's his dad? Zachariah. Yeah, John the Baptist's dad is Zachariah. One of the leaders, he's a priest, so he's the leader of the church. An angel comes to him and says, I've got good news for you. What does he say? I will reject your message. Don't believe in angels. Don't believe whatever you're going to teach me. So right there, at the very beginning, he's rejecting the arrival of that angel's message. And we think Zachariah is a good person. He's a symbol of the church. Right back here, rejecting. Go forward 6 months. Jesus is born. The wise men come. By the way, who are the wise men? The men of the East. But we would bring this to end-time prophecy. Who are the wise men at the end of the world? They're the wise men at the end of the world. They're us, aren't they? Yeah? Yeah? They're us. They're wise. They've studied the prophecy of Balaam, and they understand what's going on. So right here, we understand what's going on, don't we? And the leadership of the church say, we don't like this message, we're rejecting it. So you have a number of people that are going to be coming up. The wise men, the shepherds, who else? Who are the 2 people that are going to meet Jesus in the temple? Annas and Simeon. Anna and Simeon. Okay, so the wise men are the same people as the shepherds, are the same people as Anna, is the same people as. And what was Simeon? Was he a prophet? Oh, Anna was a prophet. Sorry, yes. Anna was a prophetess who'd been studying there for a long time. Widow. So, all I'm trying to say is you have all these people. They're all the same people. They're all us. And they're all popping up here at the end of the world, at the time of the end, I should say, when Jesus is born. John's born. Jesus is born. There's a rejection by ancient Israel. Because God is beginning to create something new, isn't he? There's going to be a separation between the two. All of this happens progressively. It doesn't happen in AD 31 or AD 34 or AD 70. But this rejection of the message from God happens. It's a progressive fall. Do you think Ephesus was created in a day? It just cannot have happened that way. In fact, how long does it take to create Ephesus? If you want to use a Bible verse to prove that. 3 days. It takes 3 days to create Ephesus. Literally 3 days? Not literally 3 days. 1 day is how long? It's 1 year. So it takes 3 years. It takes 3 years to create Ephesus. From the 6 months after the baptism of Christ to his death is 3 years, isn't it? And he says, by the time I die, my body, what's Christ's body? His church will be ready. It'll all be fully built in 3 years. So we can see that there's this overlap or this progressive work. We have to be able to see that. And that's why I'm saying that when we come to this story here, the sheep is the United States, because the United States is also going to be a dragon now. When it comes to dragon, it's not number 6, it's number 7. And we are required to understand how that transition happens. If you don't understand how that transition happens, you're going to come up with a false model that says this. At the Sunday law, the national Sunday law in the United States, you're going to wake up one day. We used to say when you turn on the radio, can't even do that anymore. But when we first talk about this message, people say you put on the radio, your TV, and it's, when you go onto the internet or your smartphone, you're going to wake up and say, oh, there's a Sunday law happened. Wonder how America did that. There was some secret meeting last night and it all happened. This is, we can call it crazy now, but millions of Adventists have this model. And the reason why they have this model, this incorrect model, is because they've read, what have they read to get this model? Some erroneous false doctrines. They read the Spirit of Prophecy. They read Ellen White, and she's developed this model for them. And what they haven't picked up is it's all progressive. And if you don't pick up it's progressive, then you don't understand about the role of the last president of the United States and how he's going to morph and transition, because he is going to be able to become 3 kings all in one lifetime. He's going to be a Republican king. He's going to become a dictator, and he's also going to become the leader of the world in a few short years. And if you can't see that progression and how it works, you can't conceptualize and understand how the 6th head cannot make a Sunday law, how the United States as you know it cannot make a Sunday law. And also what you don't understand is the relationship or the build-up prior to the Sunday law. All of us are required to understand the build-up to the Sunday law and how that operates. And today, it's not just about the role of radical Islam. So coming back to this story that we've got here, we've tied in the Medo-Persians, haven't we? Yep, through this story here, the Medo-Persians. We've tied that story together. If we were to go to Daniel chapter 2, verse 38, I think it is. Verse 39. Verse 39. After thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another 3rd kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over the earth. Who's the kingdom of brass? The 3rd kingdom. Greece. If you go through all of those characteristics, who's the most powerful nation out of all of these 4? I would suggest it wasn't Babylon. It was Rome. Pagan Rome was the most influential, the most powerful. That's why it's represented as iron. It crushes and destroys everything before it. It's the most powerful nation. But it identifies the nation before it as doing what? Ruling the world. Because did it really rule the world? He didn't. He didn't go to South America, didn't go to Australia or South Africa. There's vast ways of the world he didn't control because it's a symbol. So there you can begin to see that there's something about Greece that needs to be understood at the end of the world. And it's something to do with ruling the world. And it's not coincidence it comes after Medo-Persia. Because Medo-Persia is what? Two on power. And the two on power is the sheep, is the United States. So then you begin to see how Greece is now a symbol of a power that's going to do what? Rule the whole world. And we could talk a lot about that, but everybody... Oh, you answer your question.
It said rule over all the earth, and isn't the beast that comes up out of the earth the U.S.?
So we can make the connection literally through the word earth and earth, or we can understand that the word earth can have more than one, a symbol can have more than one meaning. So I'm suggesting that in Daniel chapter 2, when it says it's going to control the whole earth, the meaning there is not America. What actually its meaning is the whole world. Because if you were to build that model up, you would be saying that Greece is now going to be controlling the United States. And I don't think that's the correct application, if that makes sense. Its symbols can have more than one meaning. So we're going to have to identify that there's a power that is going to be ruling the whole world, which comes after the United States. If you're going to go to Revelation 17, it would be number 7 here. Let me take that out because that's going to confuse people. So as soon as you get to the transition from Medo-Persia to Greece, what happens to the beast? It comes alive. Can we see that? So when America dies and it transitions from Medo-Persia to Greece, from a sheep to a dragon, that allows the beast to come alive. Revelation 17, verse 8, we're going to go back to this verse because there's a portion that we missed. And the beast that thou sawest was and is not, but now in the verse here at the beginning, it doesn't say and yet is, which means alive. What does it say? Are we there? 17:8? In 17:8, it said the last part of the verse, which is what I wanted us to see, it says the beast that was, is not, and yet is. Was, is not, and yet is. That's how I described it there. But at the beginning of the verse, he does it in a very different way. It says, the beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. So we can get a couple of things. If you ascend out of the bottomless pit, it means you must have been resurrected. So we've got the resurrection. And also what do we see? If it's resurrected, it's a new manifestation of satanic power. So what's being resurrected? Because here we had the king of the south resurrected. I'm going to put it here. But now what's being resurrected? So that's what the definition means. It's a satanic power. But remember, everything is all satanic. It's all satanic. So I want to bring up this model here. When this model, this was the resurrection, new satanic power, which was the king of the south. This is after the deadly wound. So the deadly wound is 1798. So we're talking about this beast, and this beast is a combination of church and state, the woman and the government. So you need to come up with a model that you have a woman with a state who lost their relationship here, died, and now is going to come up again in the end of the world. Who is the woman? The papacy. So my brother wants to call it Papal America. So He's identifying here that the king of the north, or the beast as it's portrayed in here, is going to be resurrected because it comes out of a bottomless pit. So I want to put an R here. When you do chiastic structures and repeated enlargements, you begin to see the power and effect that they would have, and understanding end-time prophecy. So what I'm showing you here, that at the time of the end, the first time, the king of the south is a new manifestation of satanic power. But at the end, or the second time of the end, what is a new manifestation of the satanic power? Is it the south or the north? It's the north, which means that the south must be what? Same or different? The same. It's not a new manifestation of satanic power. Russia, this power here, is not a new manifestation of satanic power. It's the same one. Might be a different country, but it's the same satanic power, because it doesn't identify it as ever coming out of a bottomless pit. These things are important for us to understand, because if we don't have the strong arguments that we're required to have to understand about end-time prophecy. And you might think this is a moot point because we've known about this Soviet Union for a long time. But now, if we were to go to Daniel 11:11, we've begun to understand that the king of the south is not just the Soviet bloc, but it's Russia. And there are many people, I'm going to say in our movement, people don't like me saying that sometimes. I'll just say the people in our movement who don't actually believe that. They're going to go back to our foundational material. What is our foundational material? Time of the End magazine. The Time of the End magazine is going to say in no uncertain terms, unequivocally, that it's the Soviet bloc, the Soviet Union, that is the king of the south. And now we're going to back out of that and say, actually, depending on how you want to, what words you want to use, you might say we made a mistake, or there's refinement. Something went wrong, and we're saying, okay, it doesn't work that way. It's Russia, not the Soviet Union. And people are going to say, you're now coming off the platform, off the lines, and there's a big discussion about this, whether it's Russia or whether it's the king of the south. So you need to develop strong arguments to be able to demonstrate what is what. You could go into Daniel 11 and try and work it through that way. But I'm saying contained in the primary verse of our movement, Daniel 11 verse 40, the time of the end verse, it's already laid out for you that it has to be this way, that king of the south and France is the same power. It's the king of the south. Sorry, did I say Russia? Sorry. Russia and France are the king of the south, and there's not any difference between them. So then we have to learn or understand how we make the connection between the two. We could have done this a long time ago if we'd been careful in our analysis of studying. So I can blame human frailty, but perhaps the better way to explain it was the Lord had put his hand over a mistake and hidden that mistake, and then took his hand away. So that way we can be conscience free and blame God. History does indeed repeat. So what I want us to see is that the king of the north here is something new. It's a new manifestation of satanic power. Because no one could have ever believed that France would have got rid of her lover. No one could have ever imagined that. It happened swiftly in a very short amount of time that this transition happened from a staunch Catholic country, not only just to a non-Catholic country, but an atheistic country. It did a 180-degree U-turn. It's unbelievable what it did. No, it was a miracle that happened. Here, the king of the north, as it rises up, to the ascendancy. No one could ever have imagined, and we can now because we're immersed in this history, but before, no one would have imagined that the United States, the champion of the free world, could ever have got into bed with the papacy. But perhaps people could have bought into that because over the years, from 1798 onwards, the papacy has changed all of her clothes and she looks decent now. She looks like a decent woman, and she's tricked many, many people into thinking that she has changed. But one of her claims is that she never changes. So even though she appears to change, she really doesn't change. So when they began to make this alliance here, people bought into it really easily because they thought, the papacy is really nice nowadays, and it's a comfortable relationship to go into. So the King of the North becomes this new entity, and it's new because she's not going to use the old world now, she's going to use the new world. And now you begin to see how end-time prophecy, everything that Adventists have always understood and taught, begins to take effect when you begin to see what's happening in our own lifetime already being fulfilled before our very eyes. So when you see the work of Ronald Reagan, as he begins to enter into this relationship with her, what's been brought to view really clearly is a new manifestation of satanic power that is really a wonder and a marvel to see. I think, we've become so conditioned about the truths in our message. I think sometimes there's a danger that we don't actually see the solemnity and don't have the reverence that we should have about what truths we're actually really handling and the import of them. So let's connect France and Russia in the next 5 minutes. If you get to secular history and you were to ask secular historians, in each of the last, I think, 4 centuries, so we'd go to the 17, 18, 19, and the 2000s. So that's the 18th century, 19th, 20th, and 21st century. What are the most significant years in those centuries? Now, people would dispute, and every historian has his pet theory, but there's a pretty good consensus of what those were. And I'm going to say bar one, but actually we've made the mistake. Maybe that's not the right way of saying it. Bar one, the most significant years in all of these 4 centuries, the last 4 centuries, that have impacted the world are all years that we have as Adventists in our prophetic models. So 1700s is the year 1776. Declaration of Independence, when the United States split from Europe officially, properly, developed the Constitution, all of that is the most significant year in that century. And that's what we teach in our message. Adventists should have been teaching that. 1800s. We'll go to the 1900s. It's 1989. We had 2 world wars, and there are many, many significant things happening in that century, but the one that turned the world upside down, which was the greatest shock that no one ever imagined, was 1989. And not only was that the end of the Cold War, but there was also a new dispensation that we went into, because there was an increase of knowledge. And when I mean knowledge, I mean technology. I don't know if you'll know, but the internet was created in 1989. And 2000, that one's so straightforward, there wouldn't be any disagreement with that. 2001. This one here, as an Adventist, we'd put 1844, wouldn't we? But if you asked historians, it would be 1848. 1848 is the most significant year of the 18th century, of the 19th century in the 1800s. And it's for this reason. If you go to the world, Europe, you see way back here in the 1700s, 18th century, that revolution begins. It begins with which country? France. And this revolution is going to sweep one country after another. And if you go on the internet and check this, 1848 is called the year of revolution. There was an upheaval in Europe that no one could ever have imagined happening. So this revolution that sweeps through Europe comes to a grinding halt where? Let me draw Europe this way. There's an island here, the UK, and there's Europe, and there's Asia. So there's Europe, the UK, which is part of Europe, and here's Asia. Or China, just call it Asia. And there's something in the middle here, which is what country? No, France is over here. This is Russia. Sometimes my simplistic box diagrams in geography don't do it justice. So, where does revolution begin? Here, in the West. And in 1848, revolution is going to sweep through Europe, and it comes to a grinding halt where? At the borders of Russia. The Russians escape the year of revolution. What other country does? The United Kingdom. These are the two countries that escape revolution. The United Kingdom has its own unique history of why that happened, but my focus is here on Russia. So France begins this work of revolution, and through the 19th century, the 1800s, the work of revolution is complete as it destroys and decimates Europe. But it doesn't meet Russia until you get to the 20th century, 1917. Everybody's familiar with 1917? The Bolshevik Revolution. This is just the finishing touches of the year 1848. So what we should be able to do is connect history with prophecy. And we should be able to connect the very Western power to the very Eastern power as Europe goes through revolution. And the beginning is the end. It's the same entity. So when we think about this history, and we think about the papacy in the old world and the papacy in the new world, and it's a satanic power that comes out of a bottomless pit, it's different dynamic to between France and Russia. Encoded in history, encoded in our own message, we always should have understood that it was Russia, not the Soviet Union, that's the king of the South. And when you see the warfare that occurs at 1989, when the Soviet Union collapses, this is the argument that we have to identify that the time of the end is 1989 as much as it is 1798. And if we can see that connection, how strong our prophetic model is to identify that 1989 is the time of the end, everything else just falls into place. Because all the thoughts and ideas that we've had about come out of her, my people, about Revelation chapter 10, the trampling down, where these 2 feet are going to squash these satanic empires or entities, is all predicated on the fact that we need to understand that 1989 is 1798. Because Revelation 10 is the history from 1798 to 1844, Millerite history, as much as it is the history of 1989 to the end of the world. And we could mark that in various places, but I would just say it the Sunday law in the application that we're making. But the only way you can make that assertion is by understanding the connection between these 2 dates. And I think it's a really interesting and profitable study. And we've only really skimmed it through the surface. There's much more that we could delve into to strengthen that connection about how the revolutions worked, how the deadly wound is healed, and all the connections of that. But the point I want us to see is that Revelation 10, where Christ has 1 foot upon the earth and 1 foot upon the sea, it has an end-time application that we should be teaching our church brothers and sisters, which we do teach. And if we can explain, maybe even understand ourselves, where this historical narrative began in the time period of the Millerites, it helps us to tie in prophetically and historically that Millerite history is about to be repeated at the end of the world. But it has to be predicated on the connection between 1798 and 1989, which is Daniel 11 verse 40. So I'm hoping that that was kind of a refresher for those of us who already know why verse 40 is so important, and for the 1 or 2 people that didn't know that why 1989 is the time of the end for God's people at the end of the world. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for your goodness and mercy. Lord, as we delve into your word and we see the integrity of the parables that you have given to us, that you constructed this word in such a way that it was faultless. Lord, we want to ask for wisdom and strength to delve into your word, to dig for hid treasure and understand these truths in a clearer and more meaningful way. Lord, we feel like we've only scratched the surface, and yet there are so many truths that we don't even know what to do with. So many truths that we need to share with our brothers and sisters and then to the world, that often it becomes a difficult task to put those thoughts and ideas into a systematic fashion. Help us, Lord, to understand these things clearer, so that we might be established in the present truth. As we're fed upon your word this morning, Lord, we also want to thank you that we can sustain and nourish our physical bodies. So we also ask for a blessing now upon the food that we're to eat. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.